Stop right there. Hands where I can see them.
What's the problem? I'm just locking my door.
You're under arrest. We got a report of someone breaking into this building.
Breaking in? I live here. FBI, Special Agent Davis.
Imagine this. You're finally home after a long day, you're standing at your own front door, key in your hand, and all of a sudden you hear those words. That is exactly where this story begins.
This is the start of a story that is, well, it's pretty unbelievable, and honestly, kind of infuriating. We're going to break down exactly how a highly decorated FBI agent ended up in handcuffs right outside his own apartment.
So let's set the scene. We're on the 8th floor of a luxury apartment building in Boston, hallway 812, and you can just feel the tension in the air.
It's just a quiet Tuesday evening. A man, he's in workout clothes, is fumbling with his keys, just trying to get inside his home. But a Boston police officer, hand near his weapon, has some very different plans. So on one side of this tense standoff, you have Special Agent Kenneth Davis. He's a 17-year FBI veteran just getting back from the gym. And on the other side, Officer Jason Webb, who thinks he's responding to a burglary in progress. You can already see where this is going.
So Agent Davis does exactly what you'd expect. He presents his official FBI credentials, his badge, his ID, and Officer Webb's response to this? Anyone can buy a badge online. Just like that. It's a shocking dismissal of solid proof, and it's the exact moment this whole thing goes from a simple mistake to a real injustice.
So you have to be asking, how did we even get here, right? How does a police officer end up confronting an FBI agent at his own front door? Well, it all kicked off, as these things so often do, with a single phone call.
A resident, Patricia Wentworth, is sitting in her apartment, watching the building's security feed on her TV. She sees something or someone that makes her pick up the phone and dial 911. And that's the call that sets this whole disastrous chain of events into motion.
So let's break down what she reported versus what she just decided to ignore. What she saw was a black man in gym clothes. Okay, but what she ignored was the hard evidence staring her in the face. He used a key card to get in. You know, proof that he had authorized access. But nope, in her mind, he just didn't belong.
And get this. When the 911 dispatcher actually points out that using a keycard probably means he lives there, this was her response. I've lived here 12 years, I know who belongs and who doesn't. This man is suspicious. That is a statement of pure certainty, based on absolutely zero evidence, just a deep-seated bias. So that single 911 call put two very different men on a collision course. And to really get what happened next in that hallway, you've got to understand their professional histories, because wow, they could not be more different. I mean, look at this. Agent Davis was called fearless and precise by his FBI supervisors. This is a guy who tracks down violent fugitives for a living. And Officer Webb? Well, his own supervisors had already noted a pretty troubling pattern, that he had a habit of questioning residents without sufficient basis. 15. Just let that number sink in. That's how many civilian complaints were filed against Officer Webb in just 8 years on the job. That's almost 2 a year. And when you break down those complaints, well, a pattern becomes painfully clear. Of the 15 complaints filed against him, a staggering 13 of them, that's almost 90%, involved incidents with black residents in wealthy neighborhoods.
Okay, so with all of that as background, let's head back to that hallway. Because what happens next is basically a textbook example of confirmation bias, where an officer completely ignores a mountain of evidence just because it doesn't fit the story he's already decided is true.
First, there was the proof of who Agent Davis actually was. This wasn't some kind of he said, she said situation. Officer Webb had concrete proof of his identity right there in front of him. Just think about all the evidence Officer Webb chose to ignore. Agent Davis shows him federal credentials. The doorman, Michael, comes up and confirms, yep, that's Mr. Davis. He's an FBI agent. He lives here. Then a neighbor from apartment 814 comes out and says, that's Ken. He lives there. Then another neighbor from 810 says, we see him all the time. The evidence was just overwhelming.
So what about proving he actually lived in that specific apartment? Maybe he was a real agent, but was just at the wrong door. Well, the evidence for that was even more rock solid. Let's just run down the list. Agent Davis used a key card to get into the building. His mail, with his name, Kenneth Davis, and apartment number 812, was visible in his mail slot. His name was on the mailbox directory in the lobby, and there was literally a nameplate on the very door he was trying to open that said K. Davis. Officer Webb walked right past it. Any one of these things could have ended this in seconds.
So, Agent Davis, knowing he's being arrested despite this avalanche of proof, says something loud and clear for all of his neighbors to hear. "I am complying under protest. This officer is arresting me for entering my own home while black." He wasn't just being arrested, he was making sure there were witnesses to the injustice right there in real time.
You know, actions have consequences, and the decision to ignore all that evidence and go through with this arrest, well, it had a very real and a very, very expensive cost. The moment Officer Webb gets Agent Davis to the station, the whole thing just falls apart. Sergeant Marcus Robinson, who happens to be one of the few black sergeants in the department, takes one look at the report. A guy arrested at his own door with a key card and knew something was seriously wrong. His first question to Webb was simple. Did you even check if he lived there?
$7.4 million. That was the final bill. That's the amount the city of Boston ended up paying to settle the wrongful arrest lawsuit. A direct financial consequence of one officer's refusal to see the truth that was right in front of his face.
So we're left with this question. In hallway 812, we saw a direct conflict between undeniable, rock-solid evidence and one person's powerful bias. On that Tuesday evening, bias won. And the question this whole story leaves us with is, why? And what will it take to make sure that next time the evidence wins?
So today we're going to talk about a story that starts in a pretty unassuming place, an apartment hallway, but ends up forcing a major city to completely rethink its entire police force. And really, it all boils down to one very tough question. If something like this can happen to a highly respected FBI agent, what in the world happens to everybody else? Let's get into it.
And it all kicks off with these words. Just listen to them. This is from the man at the very center of it all, FBI Special Agent Kenneth Davis. He wasn't out on some dangerous assignment. He was just coming home from the gym, and that's exactly where it all went wrong.
All right, so let's set the scene. How does a completely normal day in a luxury apartment building spiral into an incident that honestly should never, ever have happened?
First, you got to understand who Kenneth Davis is. We're not talking about just any resident. This is a 17-year veteran of the FBI. He's on the Violent Crimes Task Force. He had been living in this very building, paying almost $5 grand a month in rent for 4 years. There is no question he belonged there.
So what lit the fuse here? Well, it was a 911 call. Another resident, a woman named Patricia Wentworth, called to report a so-called suspicious person who happened to be a black man in her building. And the officer who showed up to that call was Jason Webb.
And this is the moment where things just go completely off the rails. Davis immediately tells the officer who he is, a resident and an FBI agent. But instead of taking a moment to check, Officer Webb puts him in handcuffs. I mean, right there, in the hallway, literally steps from his own front door.
Okay, so right now you might be thinking, hold on, maybe this was just a big misunderstanding. But as you're about to see, this wasn't about a lack of proof. No, this was about someone actively choosing to ignore it. I mean, just look at the mountain of evidence available right then and there. Davis had his key card, and it worked. His name was physically on his mailbox and on his apartment door. The doorman for the building came and vouched for him. His actual neighbors came out into the hall and confirmed, yes, he lives here. And on top of all that, he showed the officer his FBI credentials.
And this is where it just becomes, well, it's just mind-boggling. When he sees the official FBI credentials, Officer Webb's response is, and I quote, "Could be fake. All that other proof, the key card, the doorman, the neighbors, just ignored. He didn't even bother to walk a few feet to check the name on the door." And here's the real kicker. This shows you just how ridiculous this whole thing was. A senior officer finally shows up, and guess what? It takes him just 90 seconds, a minute and a half to call the FBI and confirm Davis's credentials are real. Another quick call confirms his residency. 90 seconds. That's all it would have taken to avoid this whole mess.
You know, in this day and age, an incident this outrageous, this clear-cut, it's not going to stay quiet for long. So now let's get into the fallout and how one wrongful arrest pretty much became a national headline overnight. And boy, did things move fast. I mean, this timeline is an absolute explosion. Just 4 hours after the arrest, a neighbor's cell phone video is already online and going viral. 1 day later, 24 hours, the Department of Justice is opening a civil rights investigation. Officer Webb is fired in about 2 months, and the whole thing ends with a massive lawsuit settled in less than a year.
So, what's the price tag for a failure this big?
$7.4 million. That is how much the city paid to settle Kenneth Davis's lawsuit. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is the cost, to the taxpayers, for one officer refusing to do basic verification.
And the fallout didn't stop with the city. Of course, Officer Webb was fired and his name was added to a national index that basically ends his law enforcement career for good. Patricia Wentworth, the woman who made the 911 call, was named in the lawsuit and eventually asked to leave the building. Even the building management had to pay up, a separate $800,000 settlement.
But as the dust settled, it became incredibly clear that this was never just about one officer or one biased 911 call. The investigation peeled back the layers and found that Officer Webb wasn't some kind of rare exception. No, he was a symptom of a much, much bigger problem.
Get ready for this number, 15. That's how many prior complaints had been filed against Officer Jason Webb in his 8-year career. Which, leads to a pretty obvious question. How is a guy with a record like that still on the street responding to calls?
And when you break that number down, the picture gets even sharper and frankly, more disturbing. Out of those 15 total complaints, 13 of them, almost all of them, were from incidents involving Black individuals. This was not just a string of bad luck. This was a clear, documented pattern of behavior that went ignored for years.
The investigations by both Internal Affairs and the DOJ found a complete and total systemic failure. Complaints were just being filed away, nobody was looking for patterns. Even when a complaint was proven true, the punishment was basically a slap on the wrist. Supervisors knew about him but left him on the street. The whole culture of the department treated racism like it was just a personal problem you could train away, not something that should get you fired.
And that really brings us to the absolute heart of this whole thing. The reason this case hit such a nerve across the country wasn't just about what happened to Kenneth Davis. It was about what his horrifying experience revealed about everyone else.
And these are Davis's own words. He just lays it all out perfectly. Think about it. He had everything on his side, an FBI badge, neighbors defending him, a key to his own door. He had the power and the resources to fight back. So his question is the one we all have to ask ourselves. What happens to the people who don't have all that?
Now, the good news here is that this case forced actual, concrete change. The city rolled out some huge reforms. Now, an officer with 3 sustained discrimination complaints gets put on desk duty automatically. 5 complaints, you're fired. A new civilian review board was created with real power, and this is a big one, they created a public database so anyone can look up an officer's complaint history.
So when you look at all of this, it's so clear. This was never really about one bad apple. It was about an entire system that let that bad apple stay on the tree, rotting for 8 long years. The new rules are written down on paper, but the real question this whole story leaves us with is, what truly changes now?